Guys, welcome to Toilets to Titles Sunday Night Live. I'm your host, Jason, and with me, as always, I'm going to start off to my left, your right. David, fantasy genius, Genesis, maybe sometimes Dennis. How you doing this evening?
Hey man, I'm all right. I did all my celebrating for St. Patty's Day last night, so I could be here tonight.
That's a pro move right there. That's a pro move. And a guy who never celebrates St. Patrick's Day because he's about as dry as Arizona. To the down and to my left, George. How you doing this evening? I know you're under the weather, but how you feeling?
Well, if you ask how I'm feeling, a little under the weather. According to some tonight, it's just the sniffles that I've been dealing with. Here, gonna try to. This might be my Michael Jordan equivalent flu game. This will be the George Reed equivalent flu podcast. How's that sound?
It sounds great, but I don't know if you have that in you. I just don't know. But who does have greatness in him? It's a guy down right directly below me. You probably know him. He is managing editor from the Fantasy Pros podcast. Mr. Pat Fitzmaurice, thank you for joining us on a Sunday Night Roundtable. How are you this
Oh,
evening?
thank you for having me, gentlemen. Glad to be the designated Irish guy on this podcast on St. Patrick's Day. And, I did have a Guinness earlier in the day, but only one. So I'm still lucid for this show.
I was going to ask if we were keeping you sober.
Yeah, I think I would still be sober because I've been busy editing NCAA tournament team capsules since about 4 p.m. or so Central Time. But I was watching my Badgers play in the Big Ten tournament championship game, so I did have to have a Guinness for that. They didn't lose, so I would have liked to have had another one to ease my pain, but one will have to be enough for now, at least till after the show.
All right. Well, if any time something that George, David, or I say drives you to another one, we completely understand.
It'll
Excellent.
probably come from. I'll say it'll probably come from me too. So just throwing that out there.
All right, I'll call for a timeout if I need to. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that.
You're absolutely welcome. All right. Before we get started, I do want to mention that we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/toilets-titles. We are currently doing a giveaway of a Bijan Robinson jersey. You can go to toiletstotitles.com and check out all the details of that. And you can go to our Twitter as well at toilets-titles, and you can get all the details. One other thing I'd like to mention is we have a gilded chat with over 200 people in it talking fantasy football at any given time. We are the most accessible group in fantasy football, maybe Fantasy Pros notwithstanding, but we are on the gilded chat at any given moment. Coach, I don't think Coach sleeps at all. He is on there all the time talking football, and the rest of the guys are there as well. We've got IDP chat. We've got Dynasty chat. We are doing regular NFL mock drafts weekly, where we're live drafting. Well, not live drafting, but we've got people picking for every team. For this one's going to be 3 rounds, and then we'll be shooting it out on Twitter at toiletstitles.com. And so we're doing a bunch of stuff on Gilded, and it is free. All you need to do is email coach@toiletstitle@gmail.com, and you can join. All right, we're going to dig into the football news, and man, it was a slow week in the NFL this week. If you hadn't been paying attention to the news, you'd have no idea where anybody is playing anymore. Nobody's on the same team they used to be. It's like they took a bag of players, shook them up, and then just threw them on the board. Somebody yelled Yahtzee, and here we are. But first thing I want to mention is that a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer has retired. Aaron Donald is hanging it up this year. And I do want to get reactions to that, especially given like going into last year, I kind of expected maybe Aaron Donald to hang it up because, let's face it, the Rams were thought to be a bottom of the barrel team at the beginning of last season. Now they go in with a little bit of renewed hope. The Puka Nacua came out and played real well. Kyron Williams came well. They were very competitive throughout all of last season, even though most of the prognosticators had them as a pretty bad team at the beginning of the year. So, Pat, let's start with you because you are the guest this week and we want to get you to that drink. What do you think about Aaron Donald's retirement and the timing?
I'm a little surprised he checked out after 10 years, but sometimes it's nice to see guys go out at the top of their games. I'm glad he got his title a couple of years ago. Obvious walk-in Hall of Famer, first ballot, one of the best defensive tackles ever to do it. Yeah, just hats off to him for an amazing career. And I remember back to the year he was drafted and how he was picked one spot ahead of the Bears. And I remember being very grateful about that as a Packers fan, that he did not fall to the Bears, because I know the Bears would have snapped him up. They had a big need at defensive tackle at the time, would have fit their system perfectly. And I just remember being very relieved. And it turned out that relief was very justified with the career he had.
George, talk Aaron Donald.
I mean, to follow Pat and everything he said is going to be difficult, but I tweeted out when the news broke that he was retiring. The greatest NFL defensive player I've seen in my lifetime. And I get there's Deion Sanders. I didn't get to watch him his entire career. I understand Lawrence Taylor and how he completely game. But I didn't get to watch Lawrence Taylor from the start of his career to the end. I didn't get to see Deion. I really wasn't into football at that time when Deion was coming in. But Aaron Donald's entire career lasted 10 years. And if you look at what he's done from his being named Rookie of the Year, being first team All-Pro every single year since then, Super Bowl champion, just the absolute one of the most dominant defensemen in the history of the game. And it just, I'm sad to see him go, because I like watching great players be great. So for him to retire after 10 years, I'm glad that he's walking away on his own terms. I'm glad that he's walking out. I'm assuming with the majority of his health still intact. So I'm happy for him that I'm glad he's going out on his terms. But as a fan of football, as a fan of the NFL, I do think he is going to be missed.
David?
It didn't really surprise me any. I mean, I expected it last year. He came back for another year. My guess is he just didn't want to babysit another year of all these youngins. He did what he needed to do. Now he's going to retire, go sit in Mai Tais, and probably end up in a booth somewhere doing analysis.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of him in the media, but maybe I just haven't been paying attention. It'll be interesting to see if he has a post-football career in the media, and or if he truly rides off in the sunset and does something else, follows a different passion. But, man, I'm going to miss watching him play on Sunday. As a fan of an NFC team, the Buccaneers, I'm not going to be sad to see him, not see him lined up against our offensive line, right? But anytime one of the great ones retires, it's hard. It's a hard day in the NFL. So got a couple of those this year with Jason Kelce. So, it's a sad day, but we get new guys coming up in the draft. And then we're going to be talking about these free agent shakeup. And I think we're going to start with quarterbacks here. We talked before the show. We're not going to go through each one of these, but I do want to mention just real quick, Kirk Cousins with the Falcons. And this is if you aren't paying attention. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields both with Pittsburgh. Baker Mayfield stays. Sam Howell goes to Seattle. Gardner Minshew with Oakland. Brissett is back with New England. Mac Jones with Jacksonville. Kenny Pickett to Philadelphia. I'm going to start this time. I'm going to start with David. Which one of these surprised you the most?
Probably Justin Fields, and only because of the order it happened in. If they had taken just one of them, it would have made sense. I expected us to bring in some kind of competition, but to bring in two competitors to go head to head and just completely clear out the rest of our room was kind of mind boggling. And I like it. I like shaking it up. I've been saying the Steelers are feeling stale for a few years now, kind of just going through the motion. So I like the mix up, but that was probably the one that surprised me the most.
Pat, I know you're a Packers fan. Are you sad you don't have to play Justin Fields twice a year anymore?
I don't know about sad. It was funny. The Packers defense had been playing really poorly late in the season. They had allowed Baker Mayfield to be the first visiting quarterback ever to have a perfect passer rating in a game at Lambeau Field, and then gave up over 300 passing yards to Bryce Young the following week. So then they played the Bears in week 17 and needed that game to, week 18, needed that game to get into the playoffs. And Fields was kind of lousy in that game, and just the Bears offense generally. But I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of revisionist history on Twitter of people who are sort of dumping on Justin Fields after this trade, with the idea that the NFL has decreed him to be a backup. But I don't know. I mean, I still think he is pretty good generally. I watched him closely when he was at Ohio State and thought he was pretty terrific then. I know he does take too many sacks. I was always kind of hoping that could be coached out of him. And the fact that he's sort of this mobile quarterback, I don't know. I feel like a lot of his sacks are more of the scrambling where he might run or might not and gets sacked like 2 or 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So they're not as ruinous to drives as the 8-yard, 9-yard sacks that a lot of drop back quarterbacks take. I don't know. I mean, I still think he's talented. I don't think this shuts the door on him being a productive real life and fantasy guy in the short-term future. But obviously it's rough if you've got him on a dynasty team right now, or if you were thinking about drafting him in a redraft league in 2024.
Yeah, I think tough part here is, they brought in Russ as well. They didn't bring Russ in to be a backup. It's going to be tough for Fields. To me, it's going to be tough to see Fields on the field this year with Russ there. But it's competition for sure. It's a cheap price. I think that's the thing that surprised most people is the Bears didn't get more. The asking price early in the offseason was second rounders, right? And they just priced themselves out of that, and they waited too long to make a trade, and Pittsburgh swoops in and gets a deal. George, super surprised about the trade, about the terms of the trade?
Well, I thought they would get more than a 6th-round pick, which can be a conditional 4th. For Justin Fields. I think the compensation was kind of surprising. I know there was a lot of talk from reporters with closer sources than myself saying that the market has really dried up for Justin Fields. And I didn't really know how true that was or not. I didn't know if that was just something that was being put out because, I mean, if you look at it, really the teams that needed a quarterbacks, they went out and they got him with the exception of a small handful of teams, right? Like Atlanta needed a quarterback, now they got Kirk Cousins. Russell Wilson was cut by the Broncos, but then he went and signed with Pittsburgh, so you didn't think Pittsburgh would be in the market for another pick. Minnesota is there, but there's talk, they just recently made a trade to move up, acquire another first-round pick. Now there's talk about they might trade those 2 first-round picks to move up into the top 4 or 5 to try to land a quarterback. So, like, the teams that need quarterbacks, they're either already in the top 3 picks or, they're making moves to move up to try to get one of those quarterbacks. So you look at the rest of the NFL landscape and it's like, okay, where would it go for him to make sense? Nobody really had Pittsburgh on the radar. And then the amount that they gave up, like a 6th that can be a conditional 4th, depending on certain incentives, is really next to nothing. I mean, not to put him in this same category, but ultimately he ends up there. He's in the Mac Jones category for trade. Like, it's just the compensation that Pittsburgh gave up to get him with the upside the kid has is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm glad Pittsburgh did it. I'm happy that Dennis's team did it. Dennis. I'm glad David's team did it, but like, yeah, the compensation that they gave up and what is widely considered to be, a very bad draft in the 5th round is really.
Yeah, I think and I wish I could credit who said it on Twitter, but this is a world in where Claypool was traded for a 2nd and Justin Fields was traded for a 6th, and make that make sense. So
it's Ryan Poles has made some good moves and some bad news, but I know David's got to be pretty happy that most of the bad moves seem to be in deals with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, like that Chase Claypool for the 32nd pick.
So they basically given up a 6th round and Chase Claypool to get Joey Porter Jr. and Justin Fields. Not a bad return there.
Not at all. And I the more I think about it, I feel like if Pickett hadn't complained, if he had just because he knew that there was going to be competition, and when they brought in Wilson, he was like, "That's not competition. That's somebody who's replacing me. He's going to start." And he got all mad and he forced his way out. And then we were like, "Okay, what do we do for the future?" Russ wants to stay. Obviously, he wants to win championships, but this puts Russ in a great spot because if he does good, and other teams are going to want to sign him again. He'll have a contract. He'll have a value next offseason, whether he stays with the Steelers or not. And if he does bad, we have a backup ready to go who has a lot of skill. And the Steelers are just a better ran organization right now than the Bears. So he's set up for success. I actually I think my favorite comment I've seen, and this is actually about the Kirk Cousins going to Minnesota and them then signing Sam Darnold. One of my friends who's a Vikings fan said, "Oh, great. We got the Wish version of Kirk Cousins."
Yeah, Sam Darnold. I didn't mention Sam Darnold to the Vikings, which I guess is my bad because he looks like he's going to be the starter there minus a big trade up. Like George said, they did acquire another first-round pick. You'd think that is to move up and maybe take one of those quarterbacks, but maybe not. Maybe they want to roll with Sam Darnold. I don't know. Limited time in San Francisco, he looked, okay, I guess, which is better than – no, it's better than his time at the Jets, I guess. That's all you can say about Sam Darnold. Quarterbacks that are still out there: Ryan Tannehill, Josh Dobbs, Carson Wentz, Trevor Siemian, Blaine Gabbert, PJ Walker. Not much left out there. Do you guys see Ryan Tannehill getting a job anywhere at this point? I'm going to start with Pat because he's the guest.
Just a backup job at best. If he goes somewhere, he's going to have to settle for backup. I don't think one of the teams that might still be needy at quarterback, Denver, Minnesota, Las Vegas, I don't see them making Tannehill a starter. I think they'd just be better off staying put with Jarrett Stidham and the Broncos. Those teams are going to find a way to draft someone who's probably more promising than Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, I think best bet is a backup role. We do see a couple of guys that were starters. They're in backup roles, but we saw last year in the NFL, backup quarterback is a pretty important position. We had so many injuries to starters last year. So many backups had to start over the season. So it's pretty incredible how some of these starters are in backup positions, and we will see them probably again, with new teams, but playing. So we are going to move into our next position group, which is running backs. And if you thought quarterback was crazy this week, running backs got all screwed up. Saquon Barkley's now playing for Philadelphia. Derrick Henry's now playing with Baltimore. Josh Jacobs is playing with Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers signs with Minnesota after being cut from Green Bay. Austin Eckler is with Washington. DeAndre Swift is with Chicago, and that was the first signing and a lot of money. Tony Pollard's playing with Tennessee. Devin Singletary's playing with New York. Gus Edwards signs with the Chargers. Zach Moss with Cincinnati, and Joe Mixon was traded at the last second to Houston. The first one I do want to bring up is DeAndre Swift, 3 years, $24 million deal with Chicago. I'm not surprised Chicago went out and got DeAndre Swift. I am surprised about the price tag. We'll start with George because I haven't started with George yet. That price tag, is that our team is terrible tax?
No, not really. We talked a little bit about this. Well, let me phrase it. I did a short for High Point talking about DeAndre Swift. They liked him and they paid him a decent amount of money. If you look at the amount of money he's getting, it's the sixth most money paid to a running back that is signing with a new team since 2016. So they gave him a good chunk of money. It's a good contract. We've seen DeAndre Swift play at a high level in Philadelphia. His touchdowns would have been a lot higher, and he would have had a lot more fantasy points, and he would have been probably considered one of the better backs in the NFL if, they weren't doing the Jalen Hurts tush push from the 2 yard line in every time the ball got down to the 2 yard line. They never handed it to the running backs. They just did tush push. Jalen Hurts would go in, and he had like 8 or 9 touchdowns from inside the 3 yard line this past year. So typically you give at least, 3 or 4 of those to Swift, and you look at his overall numbers for what he did in the season, it's like, wow, that's actually really good production from the running back. So they've got a really young running back core there with Rashawn Johnson, Khalil Herbert, and DeAndre Swift. I'm assuming Swift is coming in to be the lead back, but I think they're going to use all 3 of them, and I think they like all 3 of their backs. So for fantasy purposes, I don't think this is a run hit for those who have DeAndre Swift in a dynasty league or in your redraft league. I don't think he's somebody you want to spend high draft capital on, but because I think they're going to use all 3. But it's still, as far as what he provides for Chicago, I think they like him. I think the price tag was fair.
So I think Swift has this incredible ability of not getting a touchdown, but going down inside the 5. Because a couple of years ago, I think he set up David Montgomery a whole lot. David Montgomery got a handful of touchdowns based off Swift, and then, or sorry, am I thinking of the right? No, not David Montgomery. Who was it that was behind Swift in Detroit?
It was Jamal Williams.
Jamal Williams got a contract behind Swift because he got all those touchdowns, and then last year, of course, it was the tush push, and Swift seems to have that very incredible ability to ruin your fantasy week and fall down at the 1 and let somebody else score the touchdowns. But I do think this is a good fit in Chicago. I think they paid him to be the lead back. I know they like Roschon, but if I'm a Roschon fan, seeing the signing really hurts the value there. We can talk about Swift all we want, but man, Giants fans, Tiki Barber got all kinds of upset because Saquon Barkley left the building and went to the Eagles. Pat, let's talk about, because that happened in your division with your team as well, and we'll get there. But talk about fans and former players getting upset because you go to a rival, and Saquon specifically going to the Eagles.
I don't know that Tiki Barber should be the first one to talk about loyalty, since I think he left his pregnant wife for someone, another woman. But so yeah, like, I don't know about that. I don't think he should be too salty. And I know that I saw some Giants fans saying, God bless Saquon, you gave it your all for us, whatever. So, man, I don't know if Tiki should really be talking about that. But I don't know if we have to like this a little bit for Saquon from a fantasy perspective, right? Just because he's going to a much better offense and a much better offensive line. But I don't know. Are we worried about Jalen Hurts? Not really. I don't know. I think Eagles were bottom 10 last year in running back targets. And we know that the tush push sometimes robs running backs of short yardage touchdowns. But overall, are we happy about this move from a fantasy standpoint and what it does to Saquon's value?
David? I don't mind it. I honestly think without Jason Kelce there, the line it's going to take a nosedive. He was the anchor there. I think he was the actual, mastermind behind the tush push. So we'll see how great that works. We've seen other teams try it. I think Kelce was the key. I do agree though that he's not going to catch as many passes as he would in other offenses. But I do like the fit. As far as the fans complaining, should have paid the man. You wanted him to stay, you should have paid him.
Yeah, I think he and Aaron Jones both came out and said something along the lines of, it's a business when they cut us, but we're supposed to be loyal when we leave. So that kind of thing for those guys, I'm usually on the player side with that. As far as his value, I think he has a higher scoring upside than he did last year. With Tommy Cutlets and Daniel Jones and that offensive line, and scoring upside. Even if half of his touchdown opportunities in Philadelphia are taken away, that's still to me more than what it would have been with New York. So, yeah, he's probably going to lose some receptions. It doesn't seem like Jalen Hurts passes out of the backfield. That was one of the problems with Swift is he was hot and cold because he's good out of the backfield catching the ball, but they don't do that. So, and then George dropped off, but we can keep going. But so let's talk about Aaron Jones. Let's move from Saquon. I think Aaron Jones was the other, to me, one of the big stories. The Packers signed Josh Jacobs. Incredible signing to me. And immediately from a fantasy standpoint, you worried about a two-headed monster. And now all of a sudden, split time between Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs, and that kills both of their value. The Packers answered that question pretty quickly by cutting Aaron Jones, who quickly turns around and signs with the Vikings. Pat, how are you feeling about Josh Jacobs signing, Aaron Jones leaving, and then since we're talking about the Packers in general, A.J. Dillon coming back?
Yeah, I like Josh Jacobs, and I know his metrics were not as good last year as they had been in previous years as far as things like yards per carry after contact. But I don't know. To my eye, I didn't notice any sort of discernible drop-off in his level of play. I think he's one of the toughest runners in the league, can really bang between the tackles, can catch passes. Like I think he's a good fit for Green Bay and can carry a pretty heavy load. Loved Aaron Jones. Hate to see him go. He's terrific. He's also 29, and we know that's pretty much teetering at the edge of the age cliff for running backs in the NFL. So I understand the desire to get younger at the position. And, I wish Aaron Jones well. He had such a great finish to the season, too. 3 straight 100-yard rushing games to finish the regular season, then 2 more in the playoffs, including that 3-touchdown game against the Cowboys. So, if he's healthy, and he did miss 6 games last year, he is one of the better running backs in the league. I think like a healthy Aaron Jones is like a top 10 running back. And Dillon, I don't know if he'll ever live up to his second round draft capital. But like he's functional and pinch hit pretty well in the games when Aaron Jones was hurt. And, I think he's just like a solid number 2 running back.
David, talking about Josh Jacobs, and Pat alluded to it, his metrics were down from the year previous. Of course, you had Aiden O'Connell starting when Jimmy Garoppolo flamed out. Offensive line was bad, quarterback plays bad, wide receiver play was less than what you expected. So do you write off Josh Jacobs' inefficiency last year to a poorly run Raiders franchise?
Not really. I feel like maybe to a small extent, but they didn't really have much the year before when he completely carried that team. He has the ability. He was probably a little beat up. He came in a little bit less fresh because he wasn't signed right away, so he wasn't there with the team. He wasn't working, and he just never really caught up. And they didn't use him as much either. They didn't use him in the same way they did the year before, which I was kind of surprised about. But they in the end, they don't, running backs, they just don't want to pay them. So it's so confusing to me because I'm a Steelers fan, so we run the ball where to me, it's an integral position to the team. But we're about to have the same issue with, are we going to, take Najee Harris's 5th-year option? He has 3,000-yard seasons, but it's still up in the air because Jaylen Warren has performed better. So.
Yeah, Najee seems like one of those guys. He gets 1,000 yards, but it doesn't feel like 1,000 yards because it's so bad. Typically, to start the last 2 years to start the season, it's been bad, and then towards the back half of the season, it comes on. But if we're going to talk about inefficient running backs, we can't get away without talking about Joe Mixon going to the Texans. Joe Mixon behind that Bengals offensive line was just metrically was not great, but still got it done for a team that didn't have much else. Now he goes and plays with CJ Stroud in that Texans offense with, Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And I think they just re-signed Noah Brown, right? So there's weapons back in this. What do we think about Joe Mixon entering the mix in the Texans. A good move for them, and I'll talk to Pat.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Jason and David. So a week ago, before free agency had started, I don't know. We've always got these desires of where we would like to see players go, and so many times we're sort of unhappy with the results of free agency, and guys we like go to teams that already have established running backs or receivers in place, and the touch outlook gets murky for them. But with the running back signings this year, I was pretty pleased with the way everything worked out for all these guys. And I thought the Mixon situation was one of the ones that was like sort of a pleasant surprise to me, because one, I felt like the Bengals weren't fully committed to him. Like we've been hearing for 2 years, these rumors about Mixon possibly getting released. So he goes to one of the better possible landing spots, this young and up and coming Texans offense. And, he's kind of a do everything back, not like super explosive, but just good jack of all trades type guy. And like, I think that's kind of what this offense needs. And I'm really kind of excited about Chase Brown. So I was happy to see an opportunity open up for him. I know he was like flashy in a very limited role last year, and we don't know how that role is going to carry over. But I do know when he was at the University of Illinois, Brett Bielema worked that guy into the ground, and he averaged like 30 carries a game his last year with the Fighting Illini. So I think he can play a bigger role. And meanwhile, the Bengals also bring in Zach Moss, who now we get to see if is as good as Zach Moss looked. And I know he didn't look quite as good later in the season, but early on when Jonathan Taylor was on the shelf and Moss got that opportunity, like he just smashed in that. So it'll be nice to see him get like another chance. And, if Moss doesn't really pan out, he can just back up Chase Brown. So I'm excited. Like I'm going to be really overweight on Chase Brown, I think, in 2024 redraft leagues. And probably trying to get him in a couple of dynasty leagues too before fall. So yeah, I was kind of happy with the way the whole Mixon shakeup went down.
George, as far as Chase Brown goes, you're gonna have a lot of them in your redraft leagues, because you and I play a lot together. I got to know this info. I can put you on the spot.
Yeah, so Jason is literally scouting his opponent right now, which is fantastic. Kudos to you. I respect the move 100%. I didn't watch much of Chase Brown when he was in college, but I did get to watch him a whole lot at the Senior Bowl last year. And he, besides Tajay Spears, he was the best running back on either team or the Senior Bowl. He looked absolutely phenomenal in individual drills and 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s. I have quite a few shares of Chase Brown in Dynasty, which I'm very happy about, and I will be trying to get some in redraft as well. But I think with the Zach Moss signing, it's gonna push his value back a little bit, because people are gonna look at Zach Moss. They're gonna look at what he was able to do last year when Jonathan Taylor wasn't there, and he had a few explosive games. He looked really good. So they're going to be drafting a lot of Zach Moss, which I'm fine with, but I want more of the Chase Brown, because I think he's just the better athlete. And I think if it's a true competition between the two, I do believe Chase Brown will win that competition outright. So he might not start the year as the starting running back, but I think he will finish it. So I want to have my Chase Brown shares for the end of the fantasy season, where it really matters.
And look, you helped me transition very nicely there by saying the magic words, Tajay Spears. Tony Pollard is now in Dallas, and everybody who was a Tajay owner was trying desperately to hold on to the idea that maybe he, with Derrick Henry moving out of town, that Tajay would be the guy. Does Tony Pollard, anybody super excited about Tony Pollard to Dallas? David, go ahead. I don't want to make it a free-for-all.
I think you mean to Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee, sorry.
From
Dallas, yep.
I mean, I guess we'll see. He looked a step slow last year, and, a lot of people are attributing that to coming off an injury. We'll see. The Titans, they're one of the teams that knows how to run the ball. That's my excuse for Zach Moss. He didn't. I think you could have plugged anybody behind that Indianapolis Colts line last year, and they would have looked just fine. The Colts line had a bad year the year before, fell off, and they coached them right back up. They came back to level. The Titans are another one of those teams. I still like Tyjae Spears better, kind of in the same mold as the Chase Brown over Zach Moss in the long run kind of thing. But I was never a Pollard guy to begin with. I told everybody who was drafting him in the first round last year that was a mistake, and he was never one of my favorites.
Well, Pat, how much did you attribute Pollard's performance last year to the injury? Because second half, not necessarily second half. I think we talked about this last week, but the back 6 games or so for Tony Pollard were pretty good. Not great, not first round draft pick on your fantasy team, great, but good enough that he didn't kill you those last several weeks. Of course, he was probably off most team that drafted him's team by then. But how much do you attribute his bad performance to injury?
I do buy it when Pollard said that he didn't feel like he was totally right physically until the Dallas-Carolina game, which I think was week 11, maybe. So that kind of jibes with the timetable you just laid out, Jason. So I'm willing to give him a mulligan, although I totally see David's point about maybe Pollard being overdrafted last year, and maybe we sort of falsely made the assumption that Pollard's efficiency in a part-time role as, sort of the 40% backfield guy behind Ezekiel Elliott was going to carry over into a featured role, and it didn't. Maybe that shouldn't have been a surprise, but and what I said earlier about liking all these running back moves and where everyone landed up, I guess the one I wasn't totally crazy about was Pollard to the Titans, because I think it's a downgrade for him as far as the ecosystem he's in, and also it kind of robs Tyjae Spears of the chance to be the guy. Plus, I don't know, really how these guys are going to be deployed, because both of these guys were sort of have done their best work as more the passing down guys than the early down guys. So it's just hard to tell how this is going to play out.
Yeah, 2 guys in similar roles for sure. So that leaves the one last big signing to me, which is Derrick Henry going to the Ravens. It was he was the last of the major dominoes to fall there, and it was kind of the thing that had been rumored all along. So, George, tell me if you think I saw a lot of overreaction on Twitter, as you usually do, or X, whatever you still call it. I saw a lot of overreaction of this makes the Ravens the team to beat. Do you buy or sell Ravens being the team to beat because they now have Derrick Henry?
Well, I buy them as the team to beat simply. I'm talking specifically within their division, because I still think I said it all last year with regards to Kansas City. They're the best team in the AFC until somebody can eliminate them from the playoffs. Nobody was able to eliminate them from the playoffs. So they won the Super Bowl. They're the best team in the AFC. I'll say it again this year. Kansas City's best team in the AFC. But in the AFC North, no disrespect to my good friend right above me here, but yes, Baltimore is the best team in the AFC North. They proved it last year. They went out. They've made some pretty decent moves so far this year. Now they've lost some players, but they've also acquired some players. The one thing I really do like about Derrick Henry going to Baltimore is now what are defenders going to do? You have to game plan for Gus Williams and Keaton Mitchell and J.K. Dobbins for a game or two. But now you look back there and you got Lamar Jackson and Derrick frickin' Henry. Pick one to stop. I dare you. The other thing I love about it for Derrick Henry is if you look what the Ravens did last year, I think there was only 5 designed runs inside the 5-yard line for Lamar Jackson all season. All the touchdowns he had were scrambles, but they weren't designed. It's the play broke down and he scrambled for a run, but they weren't actually designed runs. And the Ravens have specifically been cutting back the amount of designed runs that they give Lamar Jackson every year. And now you bring in Derrick Henry, who I mean, he had a down year last year. He was still awesome. He was still awesome. He had a phenomenal year last year, and it was a down year for him. And now you bring him into a situation where the team wants to run the ball, especially inside the 5. They want to run the ball. I mean, freaking Gus Edwards had what 85 touchdowns last year, and that was Gus Edwards. And now you're going to be handing the ball to Derrick Henry. I absolutely love this signing for Derrick Henry. I think it's another fantastic weapon for the Baltimore Ravens. I still think it makes them the best team in the AFC North.
Shots fired, David. You want to respond?
I'm always going to disagree. I hate the Ravens with a passion. However, as a football fan, I was cheering for Derrick Henry to go to the Ravens as well. I thought it was a perfect fit, probably the best fit out of all the running backs going anywhere. So I'm excited to see it. I still, as far as I'm concerned, we are Lamar Jackson's kryptonite. We beat them twice again last year. He hasn't beaten us in like 4 years or something now. I don't know. And I think when they beat us, he was actually not playing. So my biggest obstacle overall with all of these running backs is I'm trying to figure out what Dallas is going to do, because I see a lot of these are just swaps between the same teams, or like, Washington picking up Eckler but not losing anybody. But Dallas lost their guy and didn't pick up anybody that I could see.
Yeah, speak to that, because that's, all the Dallas fans again on X, Twitter, everywhere where you're talking football, all of them are screaming, do something. And they're just sitting back and very un-Jerry Jones, like not making a splash early in free agency. It may feel a little bit like he's learning making splashes don't win championships. But Pat, what do you think Dallas is going to do there at the running back? Is it going to be Dowdle season, or they got some other plans?
I think they'll draft multiple running backs, and I don't hate that approach if that's what they do, because running back is a young man's position, which is why as much as the Derrick Henry signing was one we wanted to see, and I'm anxious to see what it looks like. I'm guessing the Ravens won't ever abandon the run the way they did in the AFC Championship game with Derrick Henry in the backfield. But the only thing is, like, for fantasy, I don't see myself drafting much of Derrick Henry, just on the principle that I don't like drafting 30-year-old high mileage running backs. So I'll probably not be the guy taking Derrick Henry in the second round of redraft leagues, but I do want to see what it looks like, because that offense could be fun if he's still got fuel left in the tank.
Absolutely. And the guys that are left over, and this goes to what running backs, the short shelf life of running backs more than anything else, because a lot of these guys, first, second, third round in your fantasy drafts just like 2-3 years ago, even shorter time for some, J.K. Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Zeke Elliott, Jerick McKinnon, Devonta Foreman, Dalvin Cook, Rashad Penny, Kareem Hunt, guys that a couple of years ago were getting some serious play early in rounds, and those are the guys that are left over with no jobs. George, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick on the Cowboys. I thought you guys would find this interesting. They've only signed 3 players throughout all of the free agent window right now. They signed a linebacker, Eric Kendricks. They've signed cornerback C.J. Godwin and another cornerback, Jordan Lewis. Okay, they signed 4. And long snapper, Trent Sieg. Those are the only 4 players that Dallas has signed in free agency. And it's the fewest in the entire NFL. They typically Dallas is pretty busy during free agency period. They've done nothing this year.
It's because they're trying to figure out how to pay Dak Prescott.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Him and CD.
Yep. Now, I wouldn't be surprised with Zeke out there and his knowledge of the system for them to pick him up for a year, have him coach up, the rookie or 2 that they pick up, just as a, give him a job kind of thing. If nobody else is gonna, he'll sign something cheap to play. So I wouldn't be surprised with that, seeing him still out there.
J.K. Dobbins is talented when healthy, if he could ever stay healthy. I wouldn't mind seeing J.K. Dobbins go down to Dallas and see if he could resurrect his career behind that offensive line. That'd be an interesting signing that you could probably get done pretty cheap if they're truly trying to save money for Dak and CD Lamb. So
I do agree with Pat though. I honestly think Dallas is looking at the draft for their running back. And I think they actually take one in the first round.
ooh, first rounds. Ooh, there.
That's
I
a-
don't think.
Either
I'm gonna
I think they take either Benson or they take the running back from Texas. I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, Jonathan Brooks. I honestly think they go running back in the first.
All right, so Detroit surprised us last year with Gibbs so early when he had a much later grade than I think it was 12th overall, right?
Yep.
Pat, do you see either one of those running backs being worthy of a first round pick?
I don't think this year we see a running back in the first round. Wouldn't totally shock me, but I kind of think the odds are against it.
They're desperate for it, right? So, being desperate kind of makes you do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah,
Man,
it's just that like with this year with real very little consensus as to like whether it's draft analysts or dynasty analysts who follow the rookies closely. I think if you asked people for their top fives at running backs, you would not get a lot of consensus in the top five. Like one person might have Trey Benson number one, one might have Blake Corum number one, someone else might have Jalen Wright number one, Jonathan Brooks. Like, yeah, it's just kind of all over the place. So, and plus, I don't know how much separation there is between like the top 10 running backs in this class. It just seems like different people are going to look for different traits, different body types, and it's kind of a potpourri with this RB class.
All right, we are running at 46 minutes. We still have the all-important tight end position to get to after we get to wide receivers. So we got to slam through these wide receivers so we can start talking about Irv Smith and Mike Gesicki. So we're going to talk about wide receivers, and much like the running backs, guys going everywhere. T. Higgins was tagged and is staying in place, but he's requested a trade. Keenan Allen is now in Chicago. Mike Evans is back with Tampa. Michael Pittman is back with Indy. Deontay Johnson is now with Carolina. Calvin Ridley signed a massive deal with Tennessee. Hollywood Brown is now with Kansas City. Darnell Mooney is with Atlanta. Gabe Davis with Jacksonville. Curtis Samuel with Buffalo. Jerry Jeudy to Cleveland. And Rondell Moore also traded and to Atlanta. Whew, that's a lot to talk about. And then, that's not to say that Mike Williams is now out there and available for whoever wants to sign him. I think I'm going to start with Keenan Allen to Chicago because I feel like for a brief minute, Justin Fields was like, man, I finally have a set of weapons that I can throw to. And then they're like, well, no, we're going to do that for the next guy. Keenan Allen is for Caleb Williams and not for you, Justin. So what do you guys think about the Keenan Allen trade? Personally, he's going to a rookie. I haven't gone first, so I'm just going to say, like, as far as draft capital goes in fantasy, I still love Keenan Allen, but, man, going from Justin Herbert to any rookie to me is a pretty decent downgrade. Pat, do you agree or disagree there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about Caleb Williams, but agree that it's probably a bit of a downgrade for Keenan Allen as far as fantasy. And but it is funny you mentioned like what Justin Fields had when he came in. It was like Darnell Mooney and a pretty washed up Allen Robinson at that point. And now like Caleb Williams gets here and he's got like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, pretty rosy situation for him. So like I don't know, like if Caleb Williams hits the ground running, wouldn't surprise me if he put up like a low-end QB1 season this year.
He's going to have to hit the ground running because last I checked, they didn't do a lot to fix that offensive line, have they?
No, but I mean, it was starting to improve a little bit last year. I think it was at least getting, I think you could call the Bears offensive line like nearly average last season. So and I think they'll probably throw some more draft picks at it this year too.
To be fair, if anything on the Bears is nearly average, that's a win for that team, considering where they've been over the last several years, and that's unfortunate for those fans. So, David, what do you think about Keenan Allen? Do you think that's a good trade for the Bears? Do you think it was a better trade for the Chargers? What do you think? I know the Chargers had to get some cap relief.
I don't think it was a good move for the Chargers. I'm actually a little cautious about Herbert moving forward this year. He's a great quarterback, but now he has a coach. I'm a Michigan fan. I know exactly what Harbaugh wants. He wants a defense and he wants a running game. And now they just got rid of Justin Herbert's safety blankie. That's what Allen was. He loved him. He was his most consistent target in any game. It didn't matter. Allen was his first read. And now you set him away. And got rid of Mike Williams. Like, who do they have? Like, it's deplorable. The Bears, I love it. Bringing in an experienced guy for your rookie quarterback. The other thing that I've noticed about this list, I think the most surprising thing is you could tell the difference of what the league values here. I mean, Darnell Mooney and Gabe Davis, who are nowhere near the athlete that Saquon Barkley is making much more money. Or equal money, I think, to Saquon Barkley. No, yeah, they're making a little bit more over 3 years. Darnell Mooney and Gabe Davis are not Saquon Barkley, but they're wide receivers. They value it.
George, tell me about Hollywood Brown to Kansas City.
I can't because you're not going to not let me talk about one of my favorite receivers in the entire NFL.
It's true. I can't let you get away with that.
You know my man crush on Keenan Allen has no bounds. I've been a Keenan Allen truther through the days where he was hurt. I said he's going to be great. He's just got to get healthy, come back the next year. Bam, injured again. Out for another year. No, trust me, this guy is going to be great. He's phenomenal. He finally got to show how great he is. I love him going to Chicago. It's really they said. So I'm old enough to remember when there were reports Caleb Williams did not want to go to the Bears. Like, he was contemplating maybe staying into college because he didn't want to go play in Chicago. He might not declare because he wants to get a commitment from Chicago that they won't draft him. His dad was putting stuff out. Like, I don't see any of that right now. He's looking at the Bears, DeAndre Swift, Roshan Johnson, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore. Okay, I can work with this. And we still got the number 9 pick where we're going to get probably a stud offensive lineman at number 9 to help him. So we can address the line issue there. It's a phenomenal trade for the Bears. I absolutely love it. The Bears finally have a wide receiver 1 because I don't care what anybody says. DJ Moore is not a true wide receiver 1. He's a wide receiver 2 who's been forced to play the wide receiver 1 role with just atrocious quarterbacks right here. Caleb Williams will be the best quarterback he's ever had. And unfortunately for him, he actually has a wide receiver 1 on his team to pair with him now, which I think will make him even a better player. But in my opinion, he's just not a true wide receiver 1. He's a wide receiver 2. Now that I'm done gushing over Keenan Allen, what was your question, Jason?
No, you know what? If you filibuster, you lose your chance, and I'm going to Pat to talk about.
That's fine. That's fine. I got to talk about Keenan Allen. I'm happy for the rest of the show.
Are we allowed to call him Hollywood if he's going to Missouri? Hollywood Brown?
That's a good question. Before backstage behind the show, we were talking about a relatively, like the low hit rates we've had on predicting free agent landing spots this year and other years. And Hollywood to the Chiefs was one of the few I actually got right and mentioned it on a show when I think this was before Mike Evans had re-signed, and one of my colleagues at Fantasy Pros was talking about the possibility of Evans going to the Chiefs. So I'm like, that it's kind of an organization that values team speed, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them wind up with like Hollywood Brown. And it happened, and I think it's a pretty good move, even though I've not been a big Hollywood Brown guy since he came into the league, and I feel like he's been a little bit overrated the last couple of years. I think he's going to fit what the Chiefs do well because Rashee Rice had an average depth of target of like 4.8 yards last year. He's a catch and run, short area receiver. Travis Kelce works the intermediate areas. And now you've got Marquise Brown to be the lid lifter. And it just seems like it's kind of a good fit. They do value speed, but they were getting speed and not much else from Marquise Brown, from Kadarius Toney. even though I'm not a big Marquise Brown guy, I think he's worlds better than those guys. And, they kind of needed someone like him. So I still want to see the Chiefs draft a wide receiver, but this is a nice addition for them because they just had really nothing at wide receiver last year other than Rashee Rice, who does play that short area game. They need someone who could, do damage downfield.
I just quickly tried to Google, and it failed me how many times Marquise Brown has dropped the ball in his career. Because, it feels like every time they bring in a vet, and I think Marquise Brown is a step above the guys like MVS and Kadarius Toney that they've brought in, and it's been terrible. He's a little bit higher, but I think he's been inconsistent in his play. It's one of the reasons why he's not in Baltimore. One of the reasons why Arizona was cool to let him go, aside from injuries. I do feel like he's had his share of drops. So, David, can you tell me, do you think this is going to be another one of those Chiefs signings where they grabbed somebody because he wasn't overly expensive, and then they're just going to let Pat Mahomes make miracles?
No, I think it'll be just fine. I think he's had a handful of running backs throwing him the ball, and Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. Both of those guys would rather run than pass. They're known for their legs, not really for their arms. And he's a speedster. He goes downfield. We've seen with Tyreek Hill and even with these other guys who just keep dropping the ball, Holmes will throw it down there. And I think Hollywood will be able to do a much better job than any of those other guys did.
George, you agree?
Yeah, I think Hollywood Brown coming in is going to be what they were really hoping to get with either Kadarius Toney or MVS. He's a huge upgrade over both of them. He's an established veteran. Hollywood Brown has played, as David mentioned, with a couple good quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, both good quarterbacks. But by far and away, Pat Mahomes will be the best one he's ever played with. And Pat Mahomes will actually be able to deliver the ball and hit the ball in the places and the windows where Marquise Brown will feel comfortable being able to catch it. It's a great signing for the Chiefs. It just gives them another weapon is what it really does.
Well, and like Pat was saying too, with the other weapons at the other levels of the field, he didn't have that on those other teams. He was flying down the field, but they had no other, options, no other for other people for the defenders to focus on. Now the defenders have to pick their poison. Do we stop Rice down low? Do we stop Kelsey if possible, or do we stop Hollywood? So he's going to have more opportunity down there than he did in the other locations.
Yep.
So another wide receiver I want to talk about before we get on to the all-important tight ends for sure is Deontay Johnson getting traded to Carolina. I know. I was going to start with David because it's a Pittsburgh thing, but George has an immense love for Deontay Johnson as well over the last several years. So I am going to start with George, even though I'm sure David made a face up there when I mentioned his name. George, Deontay Johnson to Carolina, is that a downgrade from Kenny Pickett, or is it not?
I'm going to do a push on the question of is it a downgrade, because look at what Bryce Young had to work with last year, right? Everybody wrote off Adam Thielen signing down there at the beginning of the year, and he was truly their best wide receiver. And it was somebody who nobody was really giving any credit to. The absolute worst weapons at a wide receiver core last year, maybe outside of the Giants, was down in Carolina. They had no running backs. They had no wide receivers. Really didn't have much at a tight end. You got a rookie quarterback who you gave up, a ton to move up to get. You got no first round pick in this draft class, which is loaded with wide receivers. So that you got to do something, and you go out and get Deontay Johnson. I love Deontay Johnson. He's a great route runner. He's got some of the best hands in the NFL. He just has a knack of always getting open. So I think him going down to Carolina will definitely help Bryce Young a little bit. It's to be determined whether or not Bryce Young is better than Kenny Pickett. The bar is very low to be better than Kenny Pickett, but I don't know if Bryce Young actually clears that bar. So it's really to be determined. Carolina, the one thing they've also done this offseason is they went out and spent $200 million in guaranteed money contracts going to the guard position. So they've solidified their offensive line by going out in free agency and getting 2 guards, Robert Hunt from Miami, and I forget who the other guard is from that they signed down there in Carolina, but they spent a ton of money showing up the offensive line. So that will help Bryce Young. Bringing in Deontay Johnson will definitely help Bryce Young. If they can get a running back down there and maybe another wide receiver in the second round, it would be, would really, really help them. But yeah, I do like Deontay Johnson, and I kind of like him going to Carolina. I expect him to get like 7,000 targets this year.
Ever since I started talking about Deontay Johnson, David's been up there maniacally petting a cat. So I'm going to keep that going because I think it's funny visual. And we're going to go over to Pat and talk about the signing, the trade for Deontay Johnson. So the wide receiver room in Carolina has not been very good, but Jonathan Mingo was open a lot and just got missed on multiple passes. I'm not saying Jonathan Mingo was good. Maybe he was open because he was in the wrong spot. I couldn't tell you. I didn't run their offense. It seems like nobody did. But do you think Young is going to get better with better weapons, or did you see enough last year to say that even with great weapons, Young's not going to be the guy? Because I didn't see a lot of flashes from him.
Didn't see a lot of flashes, but the supporting cast was so bad that I almost want to give him a mulligan for last year. And I'd mentioned that game against the Packers. It was on Christmas Eve day where he lit up Green Bay for like 300 plus yards, and he looked really good that day. Yes, the Packer defense was going through a bad stretch, but like that was sort of a glimpse of the better version of Bryce Young that maybe we'll see this year. So I'm hoping, Mingo, I've got some optimism that he can be maybe a, poor man's watered down version of Anquan Bolden. I liked him coming out of the draft. Deontay Johnson, he's going to drive Carolina fans nuts with the occasional drops and his penchant for running backward after the catch. But, as George said, he's going to get 1 million targets this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Deontay Johnson had the kind of season for a full season that Adam Thielen had for about half a season last year, which would be pretty darn good for fantasy. I've got some hope for Bryce Young, and I think Deontay is going to be his undisputed go-to guy.
David, I'm going to start calling you Dr. Evil, and we're going to let you talk about the former Steeler Deontay Johnson.
I love the move for the Panthers. I don't love it for the Steelers. I mean, I know that we're great at drafting guys, but in the metrics, even though he wasn't used to his full potential in Pittsburgh, he was like top 5 in open score. The guy gets open all the time. The quarterbacks just weren't seeing him. Pickett, I mean, none of them were seeing him, which is probably the only qualm down there with Carolina, because Bryce Young is quite short, so we'll see if he can even see over his linemen. But I do think, they got a lot of help on the offensive line. They got Deontay Johnson. Mingo, it's just his second year. He'll be fine. So I could see him having a much better year this year, to the point where I've already predicted that they win that division. Obviously, that could change via the draft, but as of right now, I like Carolina's chances, and Deontay Johnson's a big reason why.
That's bold. I'll pick them to lose the division again, be last place. And that's my son, Eli. Hi, Eli. It's almost time for your bed, so enjoy watching the end of the show, bud. So I do want to bring up Curtis Samuel going to Buffalo, only because I really like his skill set, and the fact is I had to Google it again because I can't believe he's only 27 years old. I feel like he's been in the league for 30 years. He feels like a much older player. I like that move. If you guys have any other moves for wide receivers that you really like, I'm going to start with Pat. Any of the ones we haven't talked about, anything you like?
Oh, can I talk about the ones I don't like?
Absolutely, do that instead.
All right, yeah, I'll talk about two of the ones I didn't like. Calvin Ridley to the Titans, at least not for Ridley. Going to, a tough quarterback situation, and it's him and DeAndre Hopkins. So, like, both of those guys are just going to be, non-starters for me, I think, in redraft this year. Although, like, I don't know, I guess in super flex leagues, maybe Will Levis becomes viable with like two pretty good wide receivers to throw to, even though it was, he had that great first game where he throws the 3 touchdown passes to DeAndre Hopkins. And then I felt like the rest of the season was that Chris Farley gif where he's like all excited and then his face just drops as like he becomes disappointed. Like that was sort of the rest of Will Levis's season. And the other one you just mentioned, Curtis Samuel, just because I'm kind of a Khalil Shakir truther. And here you've got two guys who I feel like are best used as slot receivers, even though, I don't know, Shakir and maybe Samuel can sometimes line up outside, but really I feel like it's 2 slot receivers. And I was hoping it was just going to be Shakir and I was going to be drafting him all over the place this year if he was the number 2 behind Diggs. But now that Curtis Samuel's in the picture, I think that robs Shakir of some of his luster.
I feel like that's Curtis Samuel's lot in life, though. He goes to Washington and he steals a bunch of touches from the 2 guys there, and now he goes up to Buffalo and he's hurting your Shakir, and they're going to run it with him and do all kinds of weird stuff. And again, he's 27, he's younger than Calvin Ridley, which just doesn't make sense. Mathematically to me, because he just feels like a much older player. I don't know why I feel like he's been around forever. But George, I'm gonna go to you next, and you can talk about a movie you liked, or if you can change the rules just like Pat did and pick ones you didn't like. You got to unmute first, though, George.
I thought I did. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm going to go with one I didn't like. That's also going to be Calvin Ridley to Tennessee. Listen, Tennessee went out and made him the 9th highest paid wide receiver per year this year. That's absolutely insane. They're paying him almost $23 million a year. And I know when a team is really bad, like Tennessee, and they're rebuilding, the best thing you can do is go out and sign a wide receiver and pay him the 9th most money per year at that position, and then go out and sign and pay a running back a lot of money as well. It's bad mismanagement, I think, by Tennessee. They need a lot of help on the offensive line. They need a lot of help on defense. There's other positions that personally I think they should have addressed outside of wide receiver and running back. And so those reasons I don't like that signing. It's going to be good for Will Levis. I mean, he's got two competent wide receivers. So like Pat said, in Superflex League, he's viable as a quarterback 2 now. He'll put up some quarterback 1 games. I'm sure Ridley will have some great games. I'm sure Hopkins will have great games. But the inconsistency between the two, you're just never going to know when to play either one, and you're not really going to trust either one. The other one that I do like is Michael Pittman going back to Indianapolis for 3 years, $70 million. They made him the 8th highest paid wide receiver per year this year, and I absolutely love it. Michael Pittman, for fantasy purposes, last year in PPR leagues, was one of, if not the, and I have to check with Bob Lung's consistency rankings when he puts them out this year. But he was one of the most, at least for me, he was one of my most consistent wide receivers week in, week out. Didn't matter who the quarterback was. He was great with Anthony Richardson. He was great with Gardner Minshew. He just, every week you could put him in and you knew you were getting anywhere between 12 to 18 points a week from that guy. So from a fantasy perspective and for what he's doing for that team, I absolutely love the Michael Pittman signing.
Well, David, George took your time there, but as a consolation, I'm going to let you be first talking about where you think Mike Williams is going to go, and that's going to wrap up the wide receiver. So I'm going to give you first shot at Mike Williams.
I thought you were going to let him get first shot at the coveted tight end discussion.
I haven't really given that much thought at all. Dallas would be an interesting spot because behind CeeDee Lamb, they just got rid of Gallup. Cooks looked okay last year, but not great. They could use some wide receivers for Dak, and if they're pushing for a Super Bowl, that wouldn't be a bad move. That'd probably be my favorite fit. A couple other wide receiver needy teams with enough money who might take a jump on him, but his injury history worries me.
Pat, what do you think? I was thinking Giants because they still need wide receiver help, but
Patriots maybe. Yeah, but the Giants because the Giants do have a lot of smaller wide receivers. So maybe, and oh man, I'm blanking on the name of the one big guy they have who was kind of good at the end of 2022, but didn't do much in 2023, and I'm drawing a complete blank on who that is.
Let me Google.
Anyway, yeah. So Giants, Patriots, those are two pretty good choices, I think. Man,
George.
Well, he's got visits scheduled this week with the Jets, the Panthers, and the Steelers. His first one will be with the Jets Monday. So I think it's going to probably be one of those three teams. Just to make it really interesting, I hope he signs with Carolina. And now you get Deontay Johnson, you got Mike Williams, Adam Thielen, I think, is still there. I want to see him go down to Carolina and where he'll have the chance, because I love Deontay Johnson, but I don't think he's a true wide receiver one. I think Mike Williams has the potential to be a true wide receiver one in the NFL. And so I would love to see him go down there and help with the Panthers and what they're doing with Bryce Young.
All right, and to round this out, we are going to get into the tight ends. I'm just going to read them off, and then anybody can talk about any one of these guys, but we're going to keep it real short because, we're not talking about the cream of the crop here, right? So Dalton Schultz resigns with Houston, Hunter Henry with New England resigns with New England, Noah Fant resigns with Seattle, Jared Everett moves to Chicago, Austin Hooper's with New England, Mike Gesicki's with Cincinnati. Colby Parkinson signs a 3-year, $22.5 million deal with the Rams. Jonnu Smith is now in Miami. Zach Ertz is with Washington, and Irv Smith is with Kansas City. Any of those names make you want to sit up and take notice, at least in redraft? I'll start with David, since he did get cut short on wide receivers.
No, not really. I mean, Dalton Schultz had a great year, and that was a good deal for them. Hunter Henry will be a safety blanket as long as he can stay on the field for whatever rookie quarterback. My favorite tight end of the offseason got re-signed right back to Cincinnati, and that was Tanner Hudson. He came on strong there for a few weeks at the end of the year when he finally got some playing time. There were comparisons from him to Travis Kelce. Now, I don't think he's a Travis Kelce kind of guy, but we have seen Joe Burrow favor these tight ends, even though usually they only stay for 1 year and then they go somewhere else, like Mike Gesicki's going to do. But Tanner Hudson, I think that they might keep around for a little while and could be valuable. And nobody's going to pick him up till late. So,
Pat, any news with these tight end signings? You can even talk about ones you don't like.
All right. First of all, the big receiver on the Giants I couldn't think of before was Isaiah Hodgins. That's who I was trying to come up with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, God, I'd like to not be able to think about any of these guys, but my favorite home league is a 16-team, 24-round extravaganza. So, people have 3 or 4 tight ends in that league, and I'm probably going to be drafting some of these guys. I'm curious to see if the Dolphins just totally nuke Jonnu Smith's production, like if it's true that the Dolphins just don't use tight ends, or if Gesicki was just not the right one. And then I'm curious about Gesicki himself, because I don't know, we had some people had high hopes for Irv Smith when he went to the Bengals, playing with Joe Burrow, it's great. And then the Bengals just used this ensemble tight end cast of David's guy Tanner Hudson and who's the blocker, Drew Sample. And I just wonder if Gesicki is just going to be part of the ensemble or if he's actually going to be the main guy and, once again, reprise like that one good year he had and, maybe get people interested for fantasy. I don't think he's going to get drafted, but, maybe he might be waiver worthy at some point. So, no, this is pretty gross. Like Gerald Everett, like the Bears are just going to nuke his value behind Kmet. Ertz, old and coming off a major knee surgery. Yeah, it's just kind of gross.
George, I'll give you the last word on tight ends.
I appreciate that. The one that really interests me is that Cody Parkinson one. Like, what do the Rams know about Cody Parkinson that the rest of us don't? Because like these guys really didn't sign for a whole lot of money, but like out of nowhere, Colby Parkinson signs for $22.5 million for 3 years. Like, that's a lot of money for a tight end. So I'm interested with that Colby Parkinson signing. If you just follow the money, that's got to be saying something. I'm not sure exactly what it's saying, but it's saying something. And then as far as Jonnu Smith goes, if he can block, the Dolphins are going to love him. The problem with Mike Gesicki was he couldn't block to save his life. And in McDaniels' offense, you have to be able to block at the tight end position. That's why Durham Smythe is still around, is because he's a decent blocker. We needed another weapon on offense. Jonnu Smith will provide at the tight end as long as he's a competent blocker, which I believe he is. So I'm excited about the Jonnu. As a Dolphin fan, I'm excited about that signing.
Well, so I know you're making a big deal of Colby Parkinson, 3 years, $22 million, and that's because it came out of nowhere. Noah Fant, 2 years, $21 million. That's also one. He was drafted super high, so maybe draft capital still and name value gives him a little bit of extra pay on his second contract. But his stats over the last several years not warranted a contract that size, especially when these other ancillary tight ends are getting such smaller contracts. So that one's big to me because I was interested. There are a few truthers out there that still want to see Noah Fant do well. And back to Seattle with all those weapons. It doesn't mean he's going to be a big breakout guy on an offense this year. But that does wrap it up for tight ends, and that wraps it up for our free agent recap show here on the Roundtable. Pat, I want to give you a chance to put out some plugs, but I will say, if anybody watching this doesn't know where to find you, it's a damn shame. But go ahead and tell them where they can find you and where they can catch you.
Oh, thanks, Jason, and thanks to you and David and George for having me. Just we're churning out stuff every week and every day, really, at Fantasy Pros. We're doing baseball stuff now, but we're football year round. So there's always going to be a ton of rookie stuff in the run up to the draft, a ton of dynasty stuff, best ball, et cetera, et cetera. So go see fantasypros.com and find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF.
And Fitz is a great follow. Again, the Fantasy Pros podcast is great to listen to. We've got shows all the time. So if you're not listening to Toilets Titles, go check out Fantasy Pros for sure. With that, for Toilets to Titles, patreon.com/Toilets Titles. I like to say we have a tier for every budget. During the season, we have all kinds of perks and extra shows for Patreon members. We're doing giveaways for Patreon members now, so check that out at patreon.com/Toilets Title. And then I do again want to talk about the Gilded chat that we run. Again, it's 200 people plus now in the chat talking about football all the time. And so check that out, and check us out at Toilets Titles on Twitter. So follow that, because we're doing a live NFL mock draft every week. We're doing a new one. So check all of that out wherever you can. We're at Toilets to Titles. And for myself, for David, for George, and again, thank you, Pat, for coming on. I want to say have a great night, have a great week, and I can't wait to see what the second week of free agency brings. Good night, y'all.